America's industrial lifeline just got severed, and the blade didn't come from China or Russia. It came from Canada. Yes, the quiet neighbor to the north just slammed the door on Washington, cutting off the critical minerals that power everything from Detroit's assembly lines to Silicon Valley's chips and the Pentagon's weapons. Copper, rare earths, coal, suddenly off limits. For Donald Trump, who spent years promising America would never again be held hostage to foreign supply chains, this is the nightmare scenario. He raised tariffs, he threatened allies, he vowed America first. Instead, Canada flipped the script and reminded the world who really controls the backbone of modern industry. And this isn't just about economics. This is about power, leverage, and survival. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Can America survive without Canada's resources? Donald Trump had spent months bragging that America held the upper hand. His rallies echoed with promises that no foreign country, not China, not Mexico, not even Canada, could dictate terms to the United States ever again. He slapped tariffs on steel, lumber, and aluminum. He framed it as a patriotic crusade. Washington would pressure its neighbors, force them to deliver, and protect American workers. But behind the speeches, another story was unfolding. Trump's White House demanded shipments of rare earth minerals and copper, the very lifeblood of America's technology, defense, and energy sectors. He portrayed it as leverage. Give us the resources or pay the price. Ottawa didn't flinch. Instead, Canada quietly prepared a countermove that would send shockwaves through America's heartland. This week, they pulled the trigger, announcing an outright halt on exports of critical minerals to the U.S. The list wasn't small. Rare earth elements needed for fighter jets and smartphones. Copper that keeps the electrical grid alive from Texas to Ohio. High-grade coal that fuels steel mills in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Washington, long the guaranteed customer, was suddenly locked out. Auto suppliers in Detroit were the first to feel the sting. Battery shipments froze overnight. In Phoenix and Albuquerque, defense contractors were warned that alloys vital for weapons production would be delayed indefinitely. In the Midwest, copper orders stalled, leaving energy projects hanging. Trump had assumed Canada would bend under pressure. Instead, Canada flipped the script, exposing just how fragile America's industrial base really is. But the shockwaves didn't stop at boardrooms and factories. They were about to slam straight into America's working class, the very people Trump swore to protect. And what happened next would shake the industrial heartland to its core. Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. For decades, these cities have been the beating heart of America's industrial machine. But when Canada slammed the brakes on critical mineral exports, that heart skipped a beat, and now it's on life support. In Detroit, auto executives were blindsided. Just weeks earlier, factories had been running at full tilt, racing to meet surging demand for electric vehicles. Now, rare earth shipments for batteries and catalytic converters were frozen. Executives scrambled into emergency meetings. Production lines slowed, and the dreaded word, layoffs, crept into every conversation. For thousands of union workers in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, the threat wasn't abstract anymore. It was right at their door. Steel towns in Pennsylvania felt the sting too. Canadian coal, vital for specialty steelmaking, vanished overnight. Without it, furnaces risked going cold. Every delay in production meant construction projects across the country, from skyscrapers in New York to bridges in the Midwest, would grind to a halt. Each lost ton of steel wasn't just a statistic. It was paychecks, mortgages, and livelihoods slipping away. Silicon Valley, usually insulated from industrial shocks, found itself trapped as well. Chipmakers warned of looming shortages in neodymium and other rare earths, the metals that make lasers, sensors, and advanced processors possible. Without them, research timelines would collapse, product launches would stall, and America's prized innovation engine would sputter. One analyst put it bluntly, without Canadian inputs, America doesn't just slow down. It grinds to a halt. And then came the Pentagon's nightmare. In Texas and New Mexico, defense contractors received warnings that copper shipments essential for guidance systems, satellites, and munitions had been cut off. Every delay in copper was a delay in national security. Fighter jet production schedules slipped. Satellite upgrades froze. Missile systems faced dangerous setbacks. For a military accustomed to near limitless access to resources, Canada's move wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a stunning reminder. Even America's defense machine could be brought to its knees. But if the shockwaves rattled industry, the real earthquake was waiting for everyday Americans, families, consumers, and workers who never imagined their neighbor could hold their future hostage. When factories stumble, America's families pay the price. And this time, the bill is staggering. From Detroit's car dealerships to Walmart shelves in Kansas City, shortages began trickling down almost immediately. Automakers, already squeezed by inflation, warned that the cost of electric vehicles would jump by thousands of dollars. Gas-powered cars weren't safe either. Catalytic converters, dependent on Canadian metals, were suddenly scarce. Electronics followed. In California, chip makers admitted production cuts were unavoidable. That meant fewer laptops, fewer smartphones, fewer medical devices. And whatever made it to shelves would come with a much higher price tag. For families already stretched thin by inflation, the message was clear: get ready to pay more for everything. Farmers in Iowa faced delays repairing tractors and combines as steel shipments froze. Trucking companies in Illinois sat idle as logistics firms canceled loads tied to Canadian mines. Even home construction projects were hit. As steel and copper prices soared, contractors warned housing costs could spike, driving the dream of homeownership further out of reach. Wall Street didn't stay quiet either. Analysts warned that markets were underestimating the disruption. Tech stocks slipped. Automakers tumbled. Construction firms issued profit warnings. Retirement accounts shrank overnight, leaving millions of Americans suddenly poorer. And the mood across the heartland shifted. What had begun as a distant trade spat now felt like a personal betrayal. A steelworker in Gary, Indiana, put it bluntly: "We were told tariffs would protect us. Now we're the ones paying the price." The anger spread like wildfire. Families saw rising costs at checkout lines. Workers saw layoffs looming. Small businesses saw supply chains collapse. For years, Trump promised tariffs would shield Americans from foreign pressure. Instead, Canada, the country most assumed would never weaponize resources, had just proven how fragile America really is. And as households grew anxious, politicians began to panic, setting off a firestorm in Washington that would redefine America's alliances. The crisis that began in Detroit and Pittsburgh didn't stay in factories. It erupted in Washington. Senators from mining states demanded emergency hearings, accusing the White House of sleepwalking into disaster. Governors in the Midwest begged for federal relief, warning that mass layoffs could spiral into a regional depression. Behind closed doors, Trump's advisors admitted what no one wanted to say out loud: America was being outplayed by Canada. The political backlash was fierce. Trump's tariffs, once sold as a shield for American workers, were suddenly cast as the spark that triggered the meltdown. His rivals hammered him as reckless, accusing him of weakening the very industries he vowed to protect. On talk shows and town halls, workers who had cheered America first now wondered if they had been led into a trap. Meanwhile, Canada was no longer the quiet neighbor. Overnight, Ottawa emerged as a resource superpower. Foreign governments lined up at its doorstep. Within days, Germany dispatched trade envoys to secure copper for its energy transition. France pushed the EU to build a joint procurement program. In Asia, Japan and South Korea rushed to ink deals with Canadian suppliers before American negotiators could even book flights. The optics were brutal. Washington, sidelined, while its closest allies courted Ottawa directly. For decades, the U.S. had dictated terms. Now it was watching helplessly as its partners bypassed it. And then came the geopolitical gut punch. China, the one player with its own near monopoly on rare earths, saw an opening. Analysts whispered about the unthinkable. What if Beijing and Ottawa aligned, even informally? The combination could lock America out of critical minerals for an entire generation. This wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a diplomatic humiliation. America's credibility as the guarantor of global supply chains, the very foundation of its superpower status, was suddenly in question. And as Washington scrambled to contain the fallout abroad, an even darker fear began to surface, that the real danger wasn't foreign rivals at all, but the hollowing out of America itself. For decades, America strutted as the guarantor of global stability. the nation others depended on for supply chains, defense, and leadership. But after Canada's shock decision, that image began to crack. Across Europe and Asia, governments scrambled to secure deals directly with Ottawa. Germany rushed trade envoys to lock in copper supplies for its green energy push. South Korea and Japan raced each other to sign contracts, terrified that U.S. demands could later crowd them out. Even NATO allies quietly asked an uncomfortable question. If Washington couldn't guarantee access to minerals from its closest neighbor, how could it guarantee weapons, steel, or even fuel in a true crisis? America looked isolated. Instead of rallying allies into a unified front, it was forced to watch as its friends cut their own lifelines, leaving Washington behind. The symbolism was devastating, and hovering over all of it was China. Beijing, already the world's largest rare earth supplier, saw its leverage multiply overnight. State media gleefully pointed to America's vulnerability as proof that even superpowers could be held hostage by supply chains. The real nightmare scenario began to circulate among analysts. What if China and Canada coordinated? Even without formal alliances, parallel export restrictions or price manipulation could create an OPEC for technology, a cartel controlling the lifeblood of chips, batteries, and weapons. The idea sent chills through Washington. For a country that once crushed OPEC's influence with military and financial muscle, the thought of being cornered by its northern neighbor and its greatest rival was unthinkable. And yet, that was the scenario taking shape. Markets reacted violently. Rare earth prices soared. Copper futures hit decade highs. Steel-grade coal spiked. Automakers and chipmakers warned of production shutdowns. But more dangerous than prices was perception. America no longer looked untouchable. It looked vulnerable. And while global capitals recalibrated, another fear began to spread at home. That this wasn't a temporary shock, but the start of a permanent hollowing out of America's industrial core. The most chilling part of Canada's cutoff wasn't the immediate shock. It was the long-term damage already being whispered in corporate boardrooms. Auto executives in Michigan admitted privately that if mineral shortages drag on, plants may have no choice but to move operations abroad. A factory can survive temporary layoffs, but not chronic uncertainty. Semiconductor leaders in California warn the same. Labs cannot gamble on whether shipments will arrive month to month. If supply can't be secured, production will migrate to Europe or Asia, wherever contracts with Canada guarantee stability. That fear has a name: deindustrialization. The hollowing out of America's industrial core, not because of cheaper labor overseas, but because its supply chains are being held hostage. Energy companies, too, are rattled. America may have oil, but it cannot build solar farms, wind turbines, or modernized electric grids without Canadian copper and rare earths. Projects already underway are stalling, threatening tens of thousands of construction jobs. For workers in Texas, Ohio, and California, the irony is bitter. The U.S. may be energy-rich, but it is supply-poor. And then there's the Pentagon. Defense contractors have already warned of delays in fighter jets, satellites, and missile systems. A military that prides itself on overwhelming dominance now faces a startling dependency. It cannot build its weapons without Canadian inputs. If these shortages persist, America's global power projection, from Europe to the Pacific, risks being weakened. The psychological blow is just as sharp. America, the nation that once prided itself on being the arsenal of democracy, is discovering that in the 21st century, even superpowers are only as strong as their supply chains. And right now, those chains are fraying. But as grim as the outlook seems, whispers are already swirling about the future. Rumors of backroom deals, secret talks, and desperate moves that could change everything. Behind the scenes, Washington is scrambling. Official statements are cautious, but the rumor mill is in overdrive. Reports claim quiet back-channel talks have already begun between Ottawa and Beijing. The idea of Canada, America's closest ally, even entertaining Chinese overtures, sends shivers through Washington. Analysts speculate that if Canada diversifies exports toward Asia, the U.S. could permanently lose its privileged access. Whether or not those talks are real, the perception alone is powerful. There are also whispers of a White House crash program to restart domestic rare earth mining. But industry veterans know the truth. New mines take years, sometimes a decade, to open. Even with emergency permits, environmental opposition could drag the process out. Rumors suggest that the administration may push for recycling programs or deals with Australia and Africa, stopgap measures, not solutions. Some say Canada's move is just temporary leverage, a bargaining chip in wider trade negotiations. But others fear this is permanent, that Ottawa has discovered the raw power of its resources and won't put that genie back in the bottle. Analysts have already started calling it America's OPEC moment. Just as oil shocks once humbled superpowers, this mineral shock could redefine the balance of power in the 21st century. And then there's the political speculation. Could Trump double down with retaliatory tariffs? Insiders warn that would backfire, pushing Canada closer to Europe and Asia. Could Washington pour billions into subsidies for American industries? Maybe, but subsidies can't replace minerals that simply aren't there. The question hanging over everything is simple, but terrifying. Is this a standoff or a turning point? Because if this rupture hardens into a long-term realignment, America won't just face higher prices or temporary shortages. It will face a future where its superpower status is conditional, dictated by foreign suppliers who hold the keys to its economy, its energy, and even its defense. And that brings us to the real moment of truth, the conclusion no one in Washington wants to admit, but every American needs to hear. Canada's decision wasn't just a trade dispute. It was a wake-up call. For decades, America assumed its industrial engine was untouchable, that resources would always flow freely, especially from its closest ally. That illusion has been shattered. Detroit's auto lines, Pittsburgh's steel mills, Silicon Valley's labs, and even the Pentagon's weapons programs all just discovered the same truth. Without Canada's copper, coal, and rare earths, America is vulnerable. This is bigger than tariffs, bigger than politics. It cuts to the core of America's survival as an industrial power. And the haunting question remains, is this the moment the world discovered America's limits? Or can Washington adapt before it's too late? Because history is clear, superpowers don't collapse from a single blow. They decline through shocks, each one eroding confidence until the world adjusts to a new order. Canada's cutoff might be one of those shocks. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Did Canada just outplay America? Or will Washington strike back harder than ever? The next disruption is already unfolding, and you won't want to miss it.